This episode of the CUInsight Experience is brought to you by Elan Credit Card. Elan partners with more than 250 credit unions to provide an outsourced credit card program. Welcome to episode 150 of the show. I think this is also going to be the season finale of season 4.
Woo-hoo! 150, baby!
And as you just heard there, my guest today is someone that I'm excited, and he's excited too. But my name is Randy Smith. I'm one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and I'm so glad you're all here today. I think you're really going to love this show. It's all about taking that deep dive with the leaders of the credit union movement who make it so great. Today, I am having a conversation with one of my favorite people, Leo Ardine. Leo is the president and CEO of United Teletech Financial FCU. He also helps leaders and organizations discover that emotionally intelligent solutions to the problems that they face. He's a return guest on the podcast. Leo, you're on episode 21. It has been way too long, my friend. Welcome back to the show.
It's been too long. Thanks, Randy. It's great to be here.
So I'm going to jump right in. I'm going to let everybody know this episode may be a little bit different, but I think it's coming at the perfect time of year. Like I said, end of the season for the show. We're in December. A lot of us take that time to kind of reflect and look back, but maybe even more importantly, look forward into what we want our lives to look like. So I was, like I said, so excited to have this conversation. Leo, there are things that you and I talked about, whether it was on the recording the last time we recorded or the time we spent afterwards, these hacks that I still use today. It annoys a lot of people. Like, my notifications are all turned off on my phone. I have basically quiet time on my phone, except for about 4 hours a day. So, but let's just jump right back in. Before we get into that, like I said, this conversation, I hope, just flows. I do want to give people who are unfamiliar with you a little bit of background. Where did the career start? And, how did you find your way to credit unions? Most of us didn't grow up going, hey, someday I want to be a credit union CEO.
No, most of us didn't grow up that way, did we? I started out in Maine working on the platform of Casco Northern Bank, and I couldn't make any money. So I moved down to Jersey, started working in mortgages, and found my way to a thrift, and then found my way to SGC Federal Credit Union, which was the old supermarket general credit union in Edison, New Jersey. And then the board of directors at United Teletech was looking for somebody, and they found me.
They found you.
And so I've been there since... They found me since 94. So I've been there a long time, and we've done a lot of great things with the credit union. Yeah.
Like I mentioned, most of us didn't grow up wanting to or knowing anything about credit unions, quite honestly. What did a young Leo want to do when he was growing up? Did you have any idea?
Oh my God, yes. I wanted to be a forest ranger. I totally wanted to be a forest ranger. Yeah. And so, isn't that weird? Yeah. It's I don't get it, the whole banking thing. But I wanted to be a forest ranger. But I grew up poor, and that wasn't really an option to go do something that wasn't gonna give you money to provide for family. And so, and you spend all this money on a 4-year degree, it didn't seem right, at least in my family, to go do that. They wanted me to be more white collar.
It's funny you say that. Similar, I think I started my first job the weekend before my actual graduation. Like, I had to drive back to college to, because it was the same thing. And when I will probably get into this more, but as somebody who loves to travel, I see like these young folks doing a gap year after like they graduate. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was an option, right?
Could do that?
I'm like, oh,
yeah, right. You could do that.
I'm like, oh, that would be, if I don't have many regrets in life, but if I could turn one thing back, that might be one of them, is like to know that existed, right? Like, not just have to start paying down the student loan debts that year. I wanted to ask you this because it's a part of your story that I find extremely interesting. And we touched on it, I know, on the last show, but I'd like people to know about this. Along your career path, you got into coaching as well. And I know you did a lot of work around emotional intelligence. As we talk more about the conversation that we are going to have, and to give people a little bit of background, I get this awesome email from Leo that's like, can we talk? After we do, you tell me you're like walking on the beach thinking about life, and you're like, this would be a fun podcast. Let's do it. So that's what we're doing today. But what brought you... you mentioned, and I know much the same way, like when you graduated from college and you were getting the job, it was about making money and providing and doing all of that. Was there a point someplace along your journey where you were like, I don't want to say there's more to it than money, but was there a point where you looked at the way you were looking at your career, looking at life, that made you move into all the work you've done to get to where you are today?
I think when we're off path, there are a lot of things that happen that are like little signals, like, hey, pay attention over here. And I think there were two things. The first was, it happened on the Turnpike in Maine. We were coming, the kids and I, after our divorce, we would do these trips. And I was like, I want them to see me scared. So we'd go whitewater rafting. We would go climbing. We would do all this stuff so that they could see me like regular. And I remember coming back from one of those trips, and my daughter, who was maybe 12 or 13 at the time, said, we need to have a family meeting. And her little brothers were in the back seat. And I'm like, okay, what's up? And she goes, we had a conversation, and we decided that we like the Maine dad better than the New Jersey dad. And so it was a real kick in the gut. And I didn't really know how to react to that, because I was like, what are you talking about? And so what occurred to me, and talking with them, they're really good people, was that my intensity was so great, and it was almost my needs were to the exclusion of just about everything else. And so even at work, very driving, very driven, I want this, I want this, I want this. And that was a clue that something needed to change. And so I started doing yoga, and then I started doing work. I took meditation classes in New York, and then those things just started to give me space. I didn't do it for any spiritual awakening. I did it because I think there's a better way. And what happened to me as I was going through that is I started to discover some tools that are helpful to me. And I think that my kids were the ongoing focus for me, because I'm not going to be here forever. And I wanted to give them some tools, or model some tools that they could use as they were going through life, because life is so damn demanding, and as they raised their families, that they had some things that could guide them. And so that's kind of what started it. And then that desire to help my kids propelled it. I got into coaching for the same reasons, because what I was noticing is that same intensity was limiting the impact of the people around me, because they were like, well, he's got all the answers. I mean, I'm being very facetious as I'm saying that to you. And I think a lot of new leaders run into that. They're like, I got the job. I got to tell them what to do. And it is so counterintuitive to just shut up and listen and just give some guidance, and then receive that feedback, and then ask really good questions around that. And so the emotional intelligence work for me was really necessary in terms of creating greater self-awareness and regulation. Don't blur, okay, so you're smart, but you don't have to let everybody else know that. And it was that sense of just kind of managing so that you could get the best out of the people that you were working with. And that's kind of the journey. But it really started with Audrey's dad. We need to have a family meeting conversation.
They like Maine dad more. That's beautiful. I have to circle back on this because it's still sticking in my head, but I found it's fascinating. You wanted your kids to see you scared. What was that?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you said that
I know, right? Yeah. Well, so vulnerability is a huge issue for people. Right? Well, anyway, it's a huge issue for me, right? And so we all walk through life with these personas that we have, in different situations that we get into. And what I realized is I didn't want the kids to see that as an example. And so I think because I sense that there's dad, kid kind of golf, I wanted to try to get that closer, because it's important to me to have a really good relationship with them. And I figured if they saw me being regular, just like them, when we all got thrown out of the boat at the Penobscot River, and I was like, holy shit, my kids are, right? That fright, it just did so much to kind of equalize as people, even though I am their dad. But that's important. And I think that those kinds of things have helped sustain a really strong relationship with them through the years.
I love that. That is fantastic. Okay, so one thing that I want to make sure when we get towards the end is that we also, just to let everybody know, provide some tools. As I mentioned, you gave me some great ones that I still use today. There's hacks that I've picked up along the way. So we will do that. But to get us going, I know I'm going to have a ton of conversations to you about this, but, I want to just ask you right off the get-go, where do you want to start? Let's talk about purpose. Let's talk about, many folks are searching for it,
But Randy, that's why I reached out to you, because I have been thinking about purpose quite a bit as we've been working through, we got out of a medallion situation in our credit union. We're trying to refocus on the membership and get the organization focused back on purpose and financial wellness. And then I'm trying to do that with my leaders too, so that there's alignment. But what occurred to me is that sometimes we have a misalignment between what it is we're trying to bring forward in ourselves and the work we do. And so when I was thinking about this the other day, I was like, that son of a bitch, he's got such a great deal, because he can travel and he can work. And his life is all about the and, not the or. right? And so what I mean by that is sometimes we have these dreams, like we have these heart desires of, I'm going to be a painter and I'm going to go to Paris and I'm going to paint on the Seine and I'm going to do this and I'm going to quit my job and do that. But that's not the reality for people. And so, and that's not the reality for me either. I need to work. So I'm trying to figure out, like, how do you get that balance between this heart desire, and for me, it's to serve and to help, and the work, right? And when I was thinking about people who are doing that, I thought of you. And so I kind of want to flip the question on you, Randy, like, because you do have that life, right? You're very fortunate, but you've made some choices along the way to do that. And I'm happy to share where I'm at and why I'm talking about purpose. But I just wondered too, maybe there's some things that you can share with me that will help me as I'm like trying to figure this shit out, you know? Will you do that? Will you answer
Absolutely. That? I mean, I love talking about this stuff. It's something that I think about often. For me, and when even in your email, when you talked about purpose, I think that's something Jill probably gets sick of hearing me say it all the time, but I think so many things were defined for us on the way that we were brought up and the way that society sees things. And it's like, well, no, you can't do that. I am not anybody who knows me knows I'm not a fan of like someday. Like, even if I know it's not going to happen today, like I'm still want to be working towards that. And to me, that's a kind of living that intentional life, but it's also like, it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of saying no to a lot of things.
Yeah. So tell me more about that. Like, how does that show? Because you've got to run a business. Like, so how do you say no to opportunity, right? Like, how do you choose the opportunities that keep you aligned with the type of life that you want to live right now?
It's interesting on both, whether it's personally or professionally. And to me, I think they both kind of go together, right? Because they can seep into each other and so they always intertwined, right? But whether it's at CUInsight, like when we do a lot of our strategic planning, we may look at a bunch of different ideas, but we're like, does that serve our purpose? And like you're talking about at the credit union, that idea of, sure, you had to get through the medallion work, but now what's the purpose? And there's so many opportunities and so many options out there. And we're getting to that point, from a company where we're looking at that. And there's a lot of opportunity, but does it serve what we're trying to do? And does it take away from the purpose of CUInsight? Personally, it is the exact same thing. And I think a lot of people don't do it. And I give an example. One of my favorite things is an empty calendar. When I look out forward, I love an empty calendar because then I can say yes to the things I want to say yes to in that moment. And I find that if I sometimes say yes to things in the moment, or yes to an idea, or yes to a thing, that by the time it comes around, if it's too far out, I'm like, oh, I had to say no to something else that I would have rather done more. And that, it takes a lot, but it also takes saying no a lot. And that to me isn't a bad thing. And it's not that I don't say yes. I love to say yes to stuff, but it's making sure that kind of aligns with what I'm looking for. And there are times that I get very frustrated normally with myself. And it's the idea that I'm like, why am I doing this? And I'm like, well, I can't change it today. So I have to do the best that I can today, but I sure as heck know I'm not going to say yes to a similar thing 6 months. That could happen 6 months from now. And,
right.
I think like anybody else, I fall into those patterns where I'm like, I did it again. Why did I say yes? So, but I think it is defining what lights you up, right? So.
Yeah, it is. That's, and what a great question. I did a half-day retreat with Stephen Cope from Kripalu. So that's a yoga and meditation center up here in the Northeast. And he's a great Dharma teacher, but that's one of his ways in for people is he starts with that question, is you're trying to look for purpose. What lights you up, right? What ignites you? What are you attracted to? Where's the energy pull for you? It's just a way of like starting the process,
Jill and I have been together now we're coming up on our 5th anniversary, and we still call it our conversation that started 5 years ago. I was spending time at the time I was in Bali, Indonesia, and every day I was journaling to the question of what makes me feel alive. And she had posted something about the question of what lights you up. And I was like, ooh, I've been thinking about this. Let's talk. And I think it's such an important rabbit hole to go down. It's too easy to say, what lights you up? My career. What lights you up? Money. What lights you up? Travel. My family. What lights you up? But to be able to dig into that and take that deeper, like for me, after spending years on this, travel is a big thing for me, but that's not what lights me up. It's the experience. And it's not even just the experience. It's the shared experience. So that idea of, and I'm sure that I can keep going down that rabbit hole, but that to me is something that people, I think because I've seen so much benefit in my own life from it, is to look at that and realize, sure, there are times that we have to do things that we don't want to do or don't light us up, but if we can reduce those.
Yeah, it's almost like you want to dilute that bucket, and drop other good things into it that balances it out, right?
I think that's one of the things, though, that like when you and I talk and, the conversations that Jill and I have about life and things like that is, I wouldn't call it, it's a lot of work to do less of what doesn't light me up or make me feel alive, but it's something that's important to me because that creates the space to do more of what does. And that to me is very important. Another thing, and I would just throw this out there, this was a conversation, and after you and I talked on the phone a few days ago, I was thinking about this, is like the idea that we maybe prioritize. So like even thinking back to your story in the beginning, my guess is the majority of the time you prioritized New Jersey Leo. Yeah. And your kids were like, we like Maine Leo.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
But one's not more important than the other. It's not like, oh, if I do good at New Jersey Leo, then I can go spend a week doing Maine Leo. I think that's how most of us think. And to me, that's a part where I'm like, how do I do Randy all the time, right? Like,
that integration piece is the challenge, right? So if I could share with you, I do a lot of values work with people, and I had to revisit my values in October because I'd always written down family as my top value. You ask anybody that, then they're like, oh, his top value is his kids, it's his family. And you know what I realized is that's a false value for me. Not that I don't love my kids, Leo doesn't like his family. That's not true. But what I realized is that was a should. Like, you should say that. You ought to say that, right? And so what happens is we try to evaluate these areas of our lives. Sometimes there's this little voice behind us that's like, oh, you're a bad person if you don't say that or if you don't do that. That's what you got to. And so for me, I'm trying to figure out, okay, was that Sister Fulgencia? Was that Father McCarthy? Who the hell's voice is that? Is that my mom? Is that my dad? Whose voice is that? And I'm trying to peel that away so I can get closer to some of the values that are important to me. And one of those is freedom. Isn't that interesting? Freedom.
Oh, absolutely.
And I would never put that down, but that's there. And so I think that's some of the work that as we sit, and I love what you said about space, needing space like that. So you said a few things that are really important to circle back to. So the first is this journaling, right? And then journaling on prompts that stimulate deep thinking. Very important. But you can't do either of those things if you don't have time, if you haven't created space in your calendar to do that work, right? And what I found as a leader is if you don't do that work, you're limiting the dimensional impact that you can have on your business because you're ignoring a whole piece of your creativity, your intellect, your spirituality that you could bring to the table to engage with other people. And that to me, like, I wish I'd known that years ago. I could have been so much better.
Me too.
At the work. I would have pissed off so many fewer people, with my silliness, but that's the point. And so those things, creating space, reflecting, and then trying to figure out, okay, what is it that is about me where I can bring this full self to work, right? And I think if you look at organizations that are really successful now, and there's a lot of work on psychological safety, Amy Edmondson's done some work on the value of creating that in an organization so people can bring their full selves into the job. God, wouldn't it be great if you could have that level of engagement with people when they're working with a member to help holistically solve that problem, not just deal with this transaction, this piece of work, this email, this task, this project. Right? It's a challenge. I don't have all the answers to that yet. I'm still trying to figure out how do you bring that integration together in a way that unlocks everything you have, right? Because when we're in the flow, like your interviews are great because you go right in the flow and so much great stuff happens between you and the person that you're interviewing. And it would be great if we could be in that space, more often than not with our people and then with our members.
When you were saying that, and I wonder, this is just completely thinking out loud, scratching my own itch type question, but I'm thinking back to a previous life, a previous career where it was customer service focused, but yet we were timed on how many people we talked to and how many points we hit, like the cross-selling metrics, all of that.
Yeah, we do that too.
When you talk about like, but even just like the compliment you gave about the flow of the show is that idea that like, I don't have to talk a lot on this show. I get to listen a lot, and it's a lot of fun. I ask you a question. You're asking me a bunch today, which is weird for me and makes me uncomfortable, but it's, but to me, that's like, if we had that same ability, and I know in my younger self, and something that I still struggle with today is what you said in the beginning, you become the CEO, you become the leader, and then you in your mind, you have to have all the answers. That's why you're the CEO. And that, another thing that I've totally stolen from Jill that I say on the podcast all the time is tell me more. Just following up on that question and listening more. I remember Chuck Fagan on, I think it was episode 3 or 4, saying, would you have to learn as a leader to listen more, right? And that is such an interesting thing, even when you take it to the team at the credit union. If they're able to listen to the members more instead of it being like, oh, wait, but before you go, did you know we have X? You do wonder how much even more enjoyable it is of an experience, not only for the member, but for the employee as well.
So where were you going to go with that? Where were you taking that in terms of the impact that we have at work in driving people to task versus impact? Maybe I'm reading too much into that.
It's something that, it's one of those things that it was a position that I held for only about 1.5 years, but I really, when I look back on it, I think it did turn the way that I looked at whether it's business as a whole, right? Like that idea of not, whether it's at CUInsight, when we talk to our advertisers or our partners or whoever it happens to be, our first question is like, so what's going on with you? What are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
Like we have all this great stuff at CUInsight, it's how do you create the relationship and know?
Yeah. I like the way that you frame that question because it's so engaging, right? Like what's going on with you? And so we certainly at UTF, we wouldn't want our salespeople to start that way. But I do think we want to ask an open question about what's the need that you have. And I think the creativity of working with people to come up with those types of questions that would indicate an interest and a sincere desire to help is really where we need to be as leaders, in our organization, when we're leading people.
And if you think about credit unions, it so fits us as credit unions, right? Like we're part of the community where you mentioned, financial health of the members. Those are all questions. It's going to be different for everybody who walks through the door, right? Like what their top priority was or is when they come through and what they're struggling with, because we know people have a hard time falling asleep at night or stay up all night because they're trying to think about something. And if, the credit union can help solve or be to help in that journey, family and money, 2 things that people stress a lot about, right?
Yeah. I was at Flene's meeting in Denver earlier this year, and they presented some research on living on the margin. I think it's what it's called. Lisa Servon did this work out of UPenn. And the things that people face are so just, damn, I don't get it. Like when we came up, it was so different. Like one of the people that they quoted said, you could have a kid, you could have a 401k plan, or you could have a house. You can't have all 3. Like that's not the American dream that we grew up with, right? But that's the reality that so many people face, and people in communities of color have it even worse. And so when we start to engage, it's understanding that there is a real need for the work that credit unions do in the world, right? And so we don't have to change the societal structure of the United States, but we can help those 3 or 4 people that come in every day, right, to maybe learn how to make better choices. And so when we talk about purpose at work, it's trying to link that work that they're doing with that person to that broken, what people are sensing is maybe as a broken dream for some people. And so that's really where I think if we can do that and then tell the stories about that, right? Tell the stories about that, how we help move them or how they move themselves. It's so impactful, right? And that keeps propelling us forward.
And I think we can bring that full circle back to the individual, right? Like a lot of leaders listen to this show, the conversations that you and I have, a lot of the times when we're talking about that personal purpose or our individual one, to me, it's the same. Are you asking yourself the same questions? I remember it was a little over probably 5.5 years ago now or something. I used to apologize for my life that I built. Like people would reach out to me and they would say, oh my gosh, you're like, when you said, it seems like you've got some things figured out. I don't have everything figured out, but I have a few things figured out. In the past, my answer to you 5-6 years ago would have been, it's pretty good, but you make sacrifices. I don't have the
Right.
bigger house. I don't have, I'm like, I'll never, like, I don't have children. So like, I don't know what it's like to coach soccer. I would apologize. But in the end, I'm like, I got to a point, I'm like, why am I apologizing for the life that I've built and loved? But that, to me, that was finding, in a sense, that personal purpose. And I think it's a great time of year when people look at that. I don't view some things as sacrifices because they're helping me get to, or allowing me to do the other things that I do find more joy in, and that does light me up, or that makes me feel alive. So could I afford a bigger house? Sure. Could I afford a nicer car? Sure. Do I? No. I want to buy the plane tickets. And I want to do it now. I don't want to wait till I'm 65 and hope to have a few good years.
Age.
I mean, so, yeah. I want to do it now. They can always work.
So what I'm hearing you say is that a way to approach a life of and is by having a good understanding of what lights you up and what's attracting you in the world.
I believe that fully. And it's different for all of us. My life is not perfect for anyone else but me. And what some people like, you mentioned Maine. A cottage on a lake in Maine does not light me up. I don't like cold.
Right.
Quite honestly, I like the ocean too much. There are things that's not for me, but to somebody else, that may be the most beautiful, that's their happy place.
Right.
Somebody else on a snowmobile might light them up. Me being scuba diving underwater lights me up.
And it's totally okay, right? It's totally okay. And
Absolutely
I think that's
okay.
where, and so in terms of integration then towards an and, you started with that activation. What's really moving me, pulling me forward into life, and what do I want to do? And then you use that as a compass to determine what are you going to say yes to, what are you going to say no to. And so certainly some of the things you said no to are sacrifices. No excuse. It's just the way it is. And because this is a very rich life that I want to lead while I'm here. And I think that's very powerful, Randy. It's simple, but it's very, very powerful.
It is simple, but the one thing that I would say is there's a lot of, and it's not tough work, but there's work behind the scenes that you have to do, right? Mm-hmm. Because you do have to be intentional about everything, every step that you're doing, or else you get off course and next year you're having the same thoughts with yourself.
Right,
and you're like, okay, next year I'm going to,
so you got to move to action.
I believe that fully, that you're always, even if it's not, I give an example. This worked out really well for us at CUInsight because of the pandemic. And we went remote and shut down our office 2 years before the pandemic. The sole motivation of shutting down the office for me was that I wanted to travel more and not have to be in the office. So it didn't get shut down day one when I decided that. I wanted to be able to work from anywhere. We were a digital company. We could work from anywhere, but it took probably 18 months to get to that point of working towards it. It took, moving to where we would, around holidays, where everybody would work from home. Before we shut down the office, the month of December, everybody worked from home, and it brought in bringing back the folks, my colleagues, and saying, how was that? Did you like it? You want more of it? That type of thing. But my goal was always to get a place that I had that freedom and flexibility and space to go work wherever I wanted to from and do this. But that took being intentional. It took not signing a new lease. It took, we don't need this office furniture. It took getting the people and figuring out what that looked like to still keep the culture that we had built too, when you couldn't go to lunch every day or go for walks or whatever it happened to be. So that to me is, if you find your values, then you can, and what does, make you feel alive, or what does light you up, then you can start working towards that. And it's like every aspect. Financial is a big part of it. I did an exercise years ago, and I've recommended this to many other people, where it's like, look at exactly what you need to live the lifestyle you want, not the budget, not the, you can only eat at home, you can't go out to dinner, you can't, you know what I mean? But to live your exact lifestyle, what is it? And that's an interesting number to have out there, right? Because then everything else is just bonus. And what's the bonus for, in my mind, is so that you can do something 20 or 30 years from now. So what is that number? And that's going to be different for a lot of people. I don't need to make $1 million a year. It's just, I love my life. Not, but to other people, they may.
Can I ask you a question?
For sure.
So, okay. You asked me some really intense questions last, so I'm going to throw them back at you. On a scale of 1 to 10, how fulfilled do you feel in your life right now? 1 is not at all. 10 is like, holy crap, I'm so lucky.
Oh, I'll be honest, a 10. The gratitude that I have, and
you're so lucky. That's so great.
I would like to probably say a 9.5 because I'm sure there's always,
Okay.
I mean, I can't wait for what tomorrow is, right? Like, so that's like something else could blow my mind. But, Jill and I talk all the time and we shake our heads at each other. Both of us grew up in small towns, and the amount of times from like a gratitude standpoint that we're like, not bad for a girl from St. Helen, Oregon, and a boy from Clawson, Michigan. This is our life. I mean, I've been to almost 60 countries now, and I hadn't been to, besides I'd been to Canada, I think, by the time I was 30 or 35, so and just finding a partner, building a business that allows me to live the life that I want to live, and I feel so grateful for so many things. So yeah, I would say I feel pretty good about what it is, but it's constant. Doesn't mean it's all, there are times when it's,
No. But what you're saying, it's just everybody gets in the shit, and so, that's really amazing. So you've really created a life of and. You've got this business that's contributing to an industry that helps people, and then
that I absolutely love and feel grateful for every day.
Right, and you've also got the sense of fulfillment in terms of having these experiences around the world. That's it's inspiring,
and it's taken many twists and turns, right? Like I'm 48 years old, and there've been highs and lows, and just like everybody else. And I didn't have any. You and I really do think share a similar story, that we had some success being almost like a person that we didn't like, and then had to find more of our true self later on. And boy, my guess is I see your smile as well, right? Like what we've discovered. It sure would have been nice if we knew that at 20, or in my case, maybe even 30, or maybe even 35 or 40, but like the 40s have been a beautiful decade for me. So and a lot of it was finding what truly lights me up, what makes me feel alive. And that it takes work, right? Like it takes change, and it takes sometimes difficult things where you might feel very selfish when you start saying no to things that people are used to you saying yes to.
One of the things that I think we ought to speak to is that not everybody can do this, right?
Nope.
And so,
nope.
Right. But I think what everybody can do, regardless of your position or your situation, is to try to true up actions that you're taking in your life so that they're more aligned with the person that you are. And sometimes that's hard because you got bills to pay, you got mouths to feed. Like I've been there. I have 5 kids.
Right. And not everybody can do it. Not everybody should do it either, right? Like my life isn't right for everybody's. Your life isn't right for everybody's, and other people's aren't right for us. And we wouldn't feel fulfilled. Boy, you mentioned something like the American dream. You mentioned that earlier, right? Like that idea for the Filene, where it's like you can have a 401k or a house or a child, but you can't have all 3. To me, that's a big redefine what's your dream? Like what's Leo's dream? What's Randy's dream? Not what's the American dream. Because to some, it may be the big house and 2 nice cars and, a swimming pool and all of that. And quite honestly, it's not my dream. You know what I mean?
Right.
But what is it? And that to me is, I think, and I've heard it a lot, right? Like, I mean, that's pushback that I've heard from people that I've grown up with, or, that where they're just like, well, maybe you should work harder. Maybe you should. So I'm like, to do what? To do more of what I'm doing today 20 years from now? Like, that's not for me, but it might be for you.
Yeah, it's the shoulds. It's the shoulds again, right? Mm.
And if it's somebody else's should, that's the tough part to figure out.
Yeah. It takes a lot of bravery to step into that space. I don't know if you guys are watching that documentary, Stutz, on Netflix.
When we were talking, I watched it yesterday, actually, and it's fascinating to me, and I want to go through it again.
Yeah. So he does talk about, there's some things that I don't buy into everything that, I read or hear, but there are some things that he said that are important in terms of understanding that life is going to be hard. It's going to be a challenge. It's going to require work, and it's nonstop. It's just the way life is until the day that we, wind up. And I think that realization is important, because then that allows us to be brave and say, well, how long do you want to stay in this space? One of the other questions that Steve Cope asks people is, what are the things that if you were 92 and you hadn't done them, you would regret the most, right? And so what we do with these kinds of like journaling prompts or these thinking prompts are to start to give us clues as to ways in to how do we want to lead ourselves better so that we can lead people better, right? Or create environments where people are better able to lead themselves at work. And so I find those things kind of interesting, and the exploration is quite valuable in terms of, well, how do you want to show up for yourself and for others?
I absolutely love that. And it makes me think of the flip side of it too. Like, what are you not going to remember at 92?
You're not going to remember that damn email. Yeah.
Well, that's what I remember when Rachel Pross was on the show. She talked about, I'm using my own words here, but it seemed like a little bit of anxiety when it came to board meetings and things like that. And she got to a point, she said, and it was a real healthy point where she was like, will a single board member remember what I'm stressing about 12 months from now, 18 months from now? And if the answer is no, then why am I stressing today about it? And I think about that. What would you be sad or regret that you didn't have the opportunity to do at 92? There's probably a bunch of stuff that you did, when you got to 92 that you could have replaced some of that with, right? And that to me is, if you're intentional on what does light you up, if you're intentional on what makes you feel alive, that you can do more of it.
Other things fall into place, right? Other things fall into place. Like you see a LinkedIn post, right?
Yeah, I don't know where I read this or saw it, and I feel terrible about it because it's stuck in my head. So I wish I could credit whoever said it or wrote it or was on a podcast. I don't even remember, but they were talking about, don't be afraid of like an empty calendar. Your plate will fill up soon enough. So that that anxiety of not knowing, just keep moving forward. And I think about that in that Stutz documentary too, when he was talking about like that work side of it. There's always going to be work, whether that's personally or professionally or whatever it happens to be. If we're constantly moving, working to do better, I think the goal is to make sure that we're, to kind of come full circle, that you're working towards that purpose, whether it's at the credit union, whether that's at CUInsight, whether that's for Leo or me. If that work is more purpose driven, then to me, it seems like we're probably going to have a pretty happy existence and a successful one at that. Leo, I could talk with you forever about this. I do have a few things that I would love to pick your brain on, and that's really the hacks that you have. Like if that, to that leader, to that the credit union person who's out there listening to this podcast today, they're thinking about life. Hopefully they're enjoying it and happy with it, but they're looking at their purpose. They're looking at, maybe there's some things they'd like to change or do more of, whether it's at the credit union or personally. I think this is a great time for personal reflection. Are there tools or hacks or things that you would recommend that people could take those first steps, right? Like, not all of us are going to go on a retreat next week to have the space to think, but are there things that people could start doing tomorrow that you would recommend?
Yeah. I think the first thing people could do is to schedule time in their calendar to think. And I encourage my leaders to try to do that. Like, can you find 4 hours this month just to work on you and the work that's coming? And so when I say you, I mean that as a leader. I don't mean that as a person. Well, I guess it's both. But right. What I'm saying is, think about the work that's coming and the changes that are facing your unit, your industry, where your subject matter expertise exists, and then think about, what does your unit need to be to meet those ends, and then what do you need to be as a leader? Almost like a gap analysis, but having to do with future focus, except on us. Okay, what does my leadership need to migrate to? So I think if you can schedule an hour a week to do that, that's great. I think the second thing that you could do is, I love that you've got your journal right there, but you can go online and you can download journaling prompts. You can just Google journal prompts. And I think the prompts that start with a what or a when or a where are really good journal prompts. They open up your mind. And if you just commit to writing for 3 minutes on a journal prompt every morning, and then doing the next piece, which is reflecting, look back at it, and then say, oh, I didn't even realize I wrote that, and look for those moments of like ahas, or like, oh, I didn't realize I was writing that. Very, very important. So first thing, create a little bit of space. Second thing would be to maybe start journaling if you're comfortable with that. Preferably not. I mean, a lot of people use the keyboard now. I think it's better to use pen and paper. It's so tactile. And I think there's something that happens when the pen scratches across the page.
Go get yourself a special pen, too, that you only use for journaling. Yeah. I'm telling you. It's
those big stick pens won't work. Okay. And then I think that in terms of leading people, and maybe for yourself too, because we've been discussing this morning around purpose really has been about getting clarity on what rings true to us, what lights us up, right? So then we can figure out how do we bring that forward more frequently in our life so that we've got more of an and life in terms of this is what personally would enrich me and this is what professionally enriches me. And so you bring those two pieces together. So just as for ourselves, clarity around what we want. At this point in time of the year, if you can give clarity to the people that you work with about what your expectations are or what the expectations of the business are, that would be really important. And then the last piece would be having meaningful dialogues with really good questions. And Jim Cardwell talks a lot about dialogues. And so we've adopted that at our company. But, if you think about the dialogue that you could have with yourself, so if you know that this is a goal that you have, which is to incorporate more of whatever it is into your work, what's going well, what could be better, what got in the way. I got two more, I think. I got two more. What did you learn and what will you do differently? So those can be leading coaching conversations for yourself, but think about having that kind of a performance-based conversation with your people. Right? Each month. Those could be some hacks that really change not just your approach to how you're living today and help you be more aligned with your purpose, but could also help your people do the same thing at work, getting more aligned through those questions and making sure that they're delivering on the aims of the business. And then I think the last thing is just tell the stories of the success, so that people are constantly reconnecting to that North Star of purpose. Just like you did when I asked you, about how you move from here, from where you were to where you are now, like that, having a constant view on we're going to close that office. That's like a little bit of a North Star towards getting a more enriching life or becoming a more multidimensional leader.
Absolutely. Just a few more things before we have to wrap up. I could just talk to you for hours.
I know.
But
I'm sorry, Andy.
Everybody else wants to listen to us talk that much. But I know one of the things that you talked about and one of the things that was very helpful to me from our last conversation was that idea of creating space. That's something after our last conversation, I know I'm at my best in the morning. And I'm not in the evening. So to that idea of one of the things that I changed after our last conversation was basically I don't get notifications until after 10 a.m. every morning. So it's it doesn't mean that I can't look at email, but I'm not getting distracted because from say 6 to 10 a.m. is when I'm at my best. So whether that's personal stuff in the morning, like journaling or meditation or whatever it happens to be, getting a workout in, or if it's that committed time to think and work when it comes to CUInsight stuff, the email's still going to be there at 10:30, right? Or 11 for me. Might not be the same for other people. Is blocking the space. Is it kind of one of those things almost how they, we say if you don't measure it, then you don't do it type of thing, is if you don't create the habit of having that space as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's important. But, a lot of people can't. So you may have some junior leaders that are listening to this and if I told my boss I need an hour to think, they'd be like, Jesus, what's wrong with you? So, not everybody's going to be open to that. But what you can do is you can block that time, maybe after the kids get put to bed so that you've got that time for you, because that's just as much about your life, what you need as much as it is about how you can be better at work. So there are always ways to block. Sometimes it can't be at work, because if you're a teller and you're like, I'm putting a sign up so I can go think, people will be like, okay, you can go think at TD Bank, So we want, I think we got to acknowledge that people are different roles, but there are different ways that you can structure your day so that you've got those times where you can do this work for yourself.
All right. So it wouldn't be the CUInsight Experience with a couple of rapid fire questions. So I'm just going to ask you a couple of them, because if people want, we will link back to your previous episode if they want to hear some of the other ones. But there was a couple of ones that I did want to ask you. This one's just for fun. Chairman Harper, when I had dinner with him in August, was like, I would love to hear this question. So I've added it because it is fun. Who plays Leo in the movie biopic of your life?
I'll say Tom Hanks. I'm going to say Tom Hanks.
There you go. Awesome.
Men of a similar age, I guess, at this point. So,
yeah. The guy can play everything. Come on. I mean, geez. So is there something that you're currently reading or you've read since the last time over the past few years since you were on the show before that that's been impactful for you that you think people should check out if they're at this place in time right now?
I'm taking this book with me on my year-end retreat. It's called The Great Work of Your Life by Stephen Cope. Yeah, I'm kind of stuck on that right now. But I think it's important because it talks about Dharma and kind of like what our, how we might be able to better unlock what it is we're supposed to do with this life. And for me, that's really, I think I've got to have a better understanding of that so that as I go back to work and work with my team, that I'm better able to settle, around that.
I am so happy that you booked that ticket, my friend. Well, that is all the time we have for today. I'll ask you one final question. Any thoughts or asks of the listeners out there as we wrap up season 4 in 2023 of the CUInsight Experience? 2022. I'm already jumping ahead of you.
22. Yeah, no, not yet. I don't know if you noticed this or not, Randy, but everybody feels so pressed. Do you notice almost like we can't take a breath? I know my team is just like, God, could we get more help, please? And so I think we just have to acknowledge that feeling of tightness that we might have. Our people are also having that and trying to find ways that we can alleviate that for them. So for us, because the winter holidays are going to be on Monday, we closed on Saturday. We're just like, give everybody a 3-day weekend so they don't have to worry about work. Simple things like that really are trying to, how could we help? And then do the same thing for yourself. I think in terms of creating space so that people can get a sense of, I can finally breathe, probably be the most important thing we do for ourselves and the people that we get to work with every day.
I couldn't agree with you more. We're hearing that over and over, what you're saying. Man, okay, I got to stop. I can't go down another rabbit hole here because I could honestly do this.
Dude, you've got an edit button. We could keep going and you could just cut.
We could, but I love everything we talked about. We just have to do it again. We're just going to have Leo and Randy shows down the road.
Well, I'm really grateful that we got to do this.
Thank you again so much, my friend, for being on the show. I appreciate it so much. And I absolutely love these conversations. I hope you enjoy the experience, and I look forward to talking to you soon. A few things before we go. Make sure to check out Elon credit cards in the show notes. Their digital technology industry leading rewards products and commitment to the credit unions make them a great partner for the show. I'm extremely grateful for their support, letting me do what I do and get to have these amazing conversations like with Leo. Please also subscribe to the CUInsight Experience on your favorite podcast player. We're on them all. And if you're looking for a book mention, like the one Leo mentioned on the show, a quick Google of the CUInsight Experience podcast book list, and you can have your next read on the way from Amazon. Last but certainly not least, thank you all for listening. Y'all rock. I always appreciate the kind words that come in about the show. I hope you all are well. Thank you for season 4, and we'll see you back after the first of the year for season 5, unless I get an itch to do another episode. But see you in January. Happy holidays, everyone. See you soon.